Pretti-Frontczak, and this is an overview on the value, or maybe even just want to say it right out, the power of play. And so if you know me, you know that I have sort of put the gauntlet down and said we are no longer apologizing for just playing. I say to people, yep, that is what we are doing, and you can just drop the mic and walk away. So this video is to bolster that Peter Pan belief in the value of play, that it's a core value that we hold on to dearly in early care and education, and there is great power in play. So let's get started and talk a little bit more about how do we know that there is this great value and power. So there are several facts, and there's inspirational quotes, of course, but sometimes we need to appeal to our sort of objective mind and remind ourselves that there's actually evidence that play promotes deep connections and healthy development. And so when we talk about connections, it's not just connections between humans, which is a necessary and fabulous thing, but it's also connections between information. All that sensory input, all that mapping that the brain is trying to do, the play process helps make those really deep connections, and then it promotes healthy development. If it helps, you can pull something from the Center on the Developing Child from Harvard. Sometimes we can pull out a big name and people might believe it more. So if you want a Peter Pan believe, here's a quote from the Center on the Developing Child's research about imaginary play. And we know that people value that prefrontal cortex so much, and executive functioning skills, especially if we can get them to think of them beyond the soft skills, and that we understand that imaginary play is how children really build those executive functioning skills. They really develop the rules that guide their action, that ability to stop, think, and then act. And they also get to practice holding complex ideas, and that then shapes how they're able to follow rules even when you're not around, how to inhibit impulses, and how to really problem solve and resolve conflicts. You can also turn to neuroscience, and you can look at the work of Dr. Dan Siegel and his colleagues. And what this image is saying is that if you want a healthy mind, if you want optimal brain functioning, we need to serve children really across the lifespan a healthy mind platter. And one of those times is playtime, just that absolute joy where you get sort of lost in the moment. And so that's another way to think of the importance or the power of play. Maybe you're a social justice advocate, and maybe that's how it will help you think about the importance of giving children more playtime. And what we know from the research is the more marginalized the group, so you could look at marginalization from a race perspective, from a socioeconomic perspective, from an ability or disability perspective, even from a gender perspective. And many of the children you serve are all four of those. And in the current society in the United States, the marginalization does come in race, in socioeconomic status, in ability, and in gender. And so the more marginalized a group, the less time they actually spend in play. And unfortunately, the less time they may spend in more responsive relationships. So it's this very difficult multiple pronged issue where we have more marginalization of many of the children we serve, the less time they are allowed or encouraged or invited or supported in play, and the less time they have responsive relationships in that play. So whether it's from the facts and figures, whether it's from reputable sources, whether it's neuroscience or social justice, we really begin to understand that play impacts early development. And if you want to pause the recording at this point and look at our infographic that looks at the impact of play across the lifespan, not just in early development, but across the lifespan as children enter into preschool, become ready, quote unquote, for kindergarten, and then on to a life where they thrive. That would be a good thing to do at this juncture, is to take a look at that infographic, really reflect for a minute on your own experiences around play, where you've maybe lost your way and where you still really believe in the Peter Pan notion that play is powerful and necessary. Now, if you've lost your way a little bit, it can be because there are a series of paradoxes in pre-K. I'll highlight a few of them. So in early care and education, we have a few paradoxes, these things that cause us great anxiety, sleepless nights. They're where we're asking people to go left and right at the same time, and then they get paralyzed. So we want to set high expectations, but we want to do that in a way that is not directing and correcting and creating great demands on children. So this paradox when it comes to play is that we think if we're setting high expectations, particularly around cognitive skills of reading and math and or readiness for kindergarten, then we must become more of this dictator. We must be more of the conductor. We must be more of the leader, the teacher, whatever this role is that becomes more demanding of what children do. And then if they're engaged in play, it causes us to hear shark music. Another paradox is that we want children to learn how to self-regulate, how to play independently or problem solve in a small group activity where they're working towards maybe a problem-based learning, maybe deconstructing something, maybe reading a book together. But they are so dysregulated that they can't engage in interaction with others. So we start to get out the kidney shaped table or the horseshoe table, or we sit in a half circle where I become the lead and I'm trying to regulate all children. And really the paradox is that we need to teach children to regulate, but we need to use fewer strategies that manage their behavior. So if we're worried about rough and tumble play, if we're worried about play becoming out of control, then we resort to how can I manage their behaviors? And that's often to put them in more structured or small group activities where we manage them versus teaching them to regulate. And they really learn how to regulate through dramatic play, through perspective taking, through impulse control. The third paradox that impacts our willingness to allow children to play is our focus on outcomes. Sometimes you'll hear that I don't even like outcomes, that I just want to think about experiences. But when we think about outcomes, especially for children who are marginalized, that could be even a child who's on an IEP, we get very nervous about standard-based outcomes, reaching the standards, writing IEP goals that are standard-based. But we still want to individualize. So where is that rub? What do we do about that when we need to teach these common outcomes, when we need to increase children's access, participation, and progress in daily activities or the general curriculum, but at the same time, we need to personalize and individualize. And where this really happens is during the power of play, not in pull out, pull over, pull aside, or one-on-one at my table where I structure things so much that I can teach you outcomes in very discrete ways. It's still individualizing and personalizing, but it's me entering into your play and being able to teach those outcomes while I'm following your lead, while I'm capitalizing on those neurons firing, while I'm thinking about choices within choices. But this means I need to really understand where you are in the developmental sequence. So I'm going to do this rather quickly, but I want you to understand that if you're going to enter a child's play, you need to see where is your entry point. Many times children's play is much lower than our play, and we feel a disconnect, and then we don't feel like play is being useful. It might feel like it's self-stimulating. We feel like it might be a loop that's static and stuck. We may not see the value, but for children, there is value in all of the things that they do. It's their way of making meaning and mapping, and they start that through sensory exploration. However, this can be something that is very difficult for many of our children who have a sensory processing disorder, who become overloaded with sensory input, who don't know how to prioritize the different sensory input. So while this is critical to developing play skills, many of our children can get stuck here because they have trouble regulating, processing, and prioritizing the sensory input. So before you go any further in your interactions and your expectations around play, you might need to gather as a team and really look at how are you helping this child process information, how to regulate all that sensory input. The next one is simple motor actions. This is also an easy place for children to get stuck or to stay because it gets comfortable and the brain says, this is feeling good and this will be on autopilot. And so this is a child who will do a repetitive action over and over where they will dump or they will swipe or they will toss or they will drop or they will bang, pat, anything that's repetitive, that's a simple motor action that doesn't, again, often seem very functional, especially in an older child, but is absolutely helping the brain make sense, keep the child regulated and predictable, and has a lot of value in the child. And if we're going to enter into their play, we have to enter in the simple motor action and maybe go one step up, which is inviting functional use of objects, where children use the object for which it was intended. But again, we need to be careful that the objects are very basic to begin with, very simple to begin with, very noticeable about what their function is, and that it's a function that meets the child's need, so that it's not a function that we want for the child to accomplish a task, but a function that they find joy and pleasure and leads to more predictability, more understanding of the complex world. Then we can think about representational and symbolic play, where children start to use one object to represent another. This starts to become this socio-dramatic, this very imaginary play of roles and responsibilities, but I still have materials with me. I'm using a blanket to be my tent. I'm using the pen to be my magic wand. I'm using the block to be my pet dog. So I'm representing one object or person or event as something else. And then I get even more imaginative, where I don't need to actually see. But you can also go back to those early executive functioning skills, that if I can't hold memories and ideas in my mind, I can't hold and remember where I've put my pretend or imaginary dog, or what role I'm playing as the imaginary vet. So it really takes those executive functioning skills for children to engage in imaginary play. And these are things that in late adult toddlerhood, early preschool children are really emerging into. But again, the more marginalized they have become in our society, the less opportunities for play, the less of a responsive adult as their play guide, the less they have these skills, the more likely they are still to be doing sensory exploration, simple motor actions, and maybe, if you're lucky, functional use. And then we start to really see how we can use all those beautiful play skills in cooperation with others to meet an end, so that we can go shopping together, so that we can run a grocery store together, so that we can engage in rough and tumble play without having meltdowns and getting angry with each other, how we can go through an obstacle course and wait our turn, how we can ride a trike and take turns, how we can put a puzzle together. So all this beautiful stuff that we would love really takes these foundational building blocks. And so when we think about joining children into play, we need to think about what is our role, but also where are they in their ability, so that we match our play with them. So this idea of matching is in this last, or very close to last slide here, where we talk about what is the ideal play partner? What is my job in the power of play? And so we really want to invite all of us to move away from that very directive conductor or sage on the stage, hence the reason we don't care for kidney size or horseshoe tables, is that we want to be more of a guide. I want you to get from outside the table and into where children are, but be there with them, be there as a guide. We want to prioritize that connection, that match between my play and their play, my interest and their interest, all those beautiful matches over just compliance, completing a task, getting your work done, and then you can go play. It's also me recognizing that stress behavior that a child may have difficulty processing sensory input, which is a barrier to them being able to play. So they may grab things, they may mouth things, they may throw things, and that's not misbehavior, but rather a stress behavior that I need to deal with before they can play more deeply, more independently, more successfully. I also need to look at play within the whole context of development. Play is emerging along with language, with cognition, with motor, with self-regulation. All of these things are happening concurrently. And so we don't just have play as one time during the day or something that happens when other work has been done. It needs to be seen holistically. And therefore, it is opportunities are distributed throughout the day to play, not just from 10:10 to 10:20, or when we're outside, or when we are done with the more necessary work. It's distributed across each and every area, each and every lesson, each and every event across the child's daily routine. Then the play becomes very predictable. They understand their role, your role, the role of the materials, how to be a play partner in return, how to be that great social reciprocity, and then we need to be incredibly responsive. So we can't be so rigid in how children play or interact with each other, play or interact with us, play or interact with the environment. We need to be responsive to where they are in their development of play and how they're processing sensory input that's allowing them to play success. So the idea of all of this is to really harness or leverage the power of play, to Peter Pan believe that it is powerful, and to, yes, definitely drop the mic, walk away, or stay put and engage in courageous conversations with others about the power of play. So visit me at prekteachandplay.com/the power of play to learn more about how you can be a play partner, how you can help children who are struggling to play, and even some professional development learning activities that you can do with one another to build your community to really Peter Pan believe in the power of play.